This is Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance in Los Angeles today, joined by Jerome Horton, member of the Board of Equalization in California. And I want to speak with you about marijuana. It is undeniable that the voters of California said yes, yes to legalizing marijuana.
They did, Brett, several times.
So yeah, they passed it in virtually every coastal county, almost every Southern California county, but statewide, 57-43 legalized recreational marijuana.
Yes.
What do you make of that? Before we talk about taxing elements, what do you make of that?
Well, you know, in general, I think during the initiative process, the voters are not really educated about everything. And so during that process, a number of folks who would have been in opposition to it sort of stood down under the premise that they wanted to collect the tax and generate the revenue, and that the regulatory aspect would come later. Unfortunately, you know, the measures just don't have the appropriate regulation and laws in order to protect the citizens.
But as I understand it, the measure does call on the state to adopt a regulatory scheme, which they're writing through right now, which would include issues relating to dosing and otherwise. Is that accurate?
Well, the legislature actually passed under a set of laws that they refer to as Mercer.
Right.
And Proposition 64 sort of overturned those laws and set in place a different set of laws. For example, the Mercer said that you had to have the three-tier system in place, and Proposition 64 provides for vertical integration. Meaning that the cultivator can actually own the distribution as well as the retail.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it makes it very, very complicated
and questionably, are there antitrust
control
elements there, I wonder?
Antitrust. Yeah. You know, conflicts of interest, but from a tax perspective, Brad, it makes it just extremely complicated.
And let's talk about taxing, because what we know is that under Prop 64, we have a 15% excise tax. We have a cultivation tax on the flowers and leaves.
Yeah, $9.25. Yeah.
We have a sales tax, and that's the state side.
Yeah.
Then the cities and counties can have their own taxes. For example, in Los Angeles, they just passed Measure M, which creates an additional 9 or 10% tax?
Actually, 17%.
17% tax.
There's a 2% business tax, a 10% tax on recreational, and then a 5% tax on medical.
So let me ask you, as it relates to taxing, if we start putting so many levels of tax on marijuana for the public sale of it, I mean, could the black market be more affordable?
Exactly. Think the Boston Tea Party.
Right.
You know,
well stated.
I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
So
they tax tea too much.
Yeah. If you look at the marijuana, it's taxed at a rate now of about 150%. So if you sell a $250,000 worth of marijuana, your tax is going to be like $300,000.
How does that compare to tobacco? Because we do tax them at a tobacco.
Well, tobacco is somewhere around 38. They just went up, maybe about 57 cents.
But is it, as a percentage, is it as high as marijuana? Do you know?
Marijuana, it doubles.
Will be much more.
Doubles. You know, if you add in all the other costs, it's almost impossible to operate in the legal market. So what it's going to do, in my opinion, Brad, is going to shift the operation into the black market, and I think we'll have an infestation of illegal marijuana in our communities.
That's exactly what we were trying to avoid when we passed Prop 64.
When we passed it, exactly.
So have we spoken with other states, Colorado, Washington, who have a few years on us as it relates to the taxing element?
Well, in Colorado, for example, they experienced about a 40% noncompliance on the legitimate side, and then the criminal side continues to exist. The one thing I think we have to realize, or people aren't realizing, is that marijuana has been around before Christ.
Yeah, truly.
You know, and it is a $54 billion criminal industry that we're trying to convert into a legitimate operation. And you just don't do that by putting the revenue first. You do it actually by putting the regulations in place, the laws, and so forth.
I hear you. But here we are.
Right.
What do we do? I mean, we got to make this work somehow.
Well, we're introducing legislation through Assemblyman Mike Gibson
Sure.
to make the
Who
collection
represents this area?
represents this area, collect the collection of the tax a lot easier. What it does is it shift the collection of the tax from the 20,000 distributors to the processors and the manufacturers. So we have less people that we have to regulate, less people that we have to control, makes it easier. And on the banking side, you have 20, 30 folks that you have to worry about as far as banking.
I got to ask you about banking, because I remember speaking with, it was either Fiona Ma or George Roanoke, both on the Board of Equalization, and they showed me pictures of someone coming in with $200,000 in cash to the Board of Equalization to pay their taxes. They were trying to be legit. And why did they bring cash? They can't use a bank because the banks won't take the marijuana money.
Yeah, because of the Federal Laundering Act,
Right.
which prohibits the banks from taking the marijuana. If they were to take it, they would lose their insurance, the federal insurance, and so forth. So the banks just don't want to get involved. There are some banks in Colorado that actually that have decided, and the Board of Equalization is working on an agreement with a bank. They asked us not to say which one.
I understand.
A bank that allows us to exchange at the bank the cash. They give the cash to us, we give it to the bank, and so forth.
But is that going to run afoul of federal regulations? Because like there's Denver Fourth Corner Credit Union sued the federal government to allow them to move forward with marijuana banking. I think that case is still pending, but it's...
Well, I think it all runs foul of the federal law until they change the federal laws. This is illegal. It's a criminal act, on the federal level.
Right.
And so until that changes, it's hard to get a federal bank.
But we've been
to actually
getting mixed
engage.
signals out of the federal government. I mean, Donald Trump, when he was running for office, seemed to suggest he would take a hands-off approach. He talks a lot about states'
but then
rights.
he appointed Jeff Sessions.
Right, the new attorney general who
And
has...
so he said, listen, I'm not with this.
Right.
I think it's terrible, and so forth and so on. And so, and they're now sending signals that they intend to investigate more. So I think there's a lot of wisdom that California, we should get it right. I think if we get it right, if we get the regulations in place, the laws in place, to first protect the citizens, then level the playing field so legitimate operators can actually compete with the criminals, and then the laws that allow us to go out and enforce the law and prosecute criminals that are operating in this industry.
But I go back to the federal government because, look, we know even in the Obama years, there were some raids of some medical marijuana facilities. There was the famous raid, I think it was in Oakland.
Yes.
That ultimately got resolved. Look, again, we're getting these mixed signals. I mean, states' rights when it comes to health care, but no states' rights when it comes to immigration or marijuana enforcement.
Right.
And so how do we get it right?
Well, first, on the federal level, it's a circus. It's very confusing. No one knows what it's going to be today or tomorrow. It's just very confusing. On the state level, it's where we have control. And we're not getting it right on the state level. You've got three different measures. One, the medical marijuana, Proposition 215, Proposition 64, and recently Proposition M, where they're just piling on as far as the taxes are concerned, without establishing the regulatory process.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention coming up on June 16th, your famous Connecting Women to Power conference.
Yes,
I
Rad.
emceed part of it last year. Huge
And did a
treat.
fabulous job.
I appreciate that. So when you come back, we'll talk more about the women's conference coming up, okay?
Sure.
His name is Jerome Horton. He is a member of the Board of Equalization in the great state of California. We are coming to you from Los Angeles today, and you are joining us on Local Edition.